Hey everybody, welcome back to the Senators Roundtable. I'm your host Jacob Billington, joined by Paul Quinney. Today we're missing out on Dayton, so we're just gonna do this together. And honestly, there's quite a bit to talk about over the past week. It's been pretty quiet in Sens land, and a couple rumors have come out over the past even just a couple days at this point. So, Paul, how you doing?
I'm freezing cold, man. I'm sitting here in Ottawa and highs of 13 degrees, constant rain, and no cloud. I think I'm starting to develop rickets or something, where your body can't synthesize vitamin D without sunlight. So if I stumble during the show, you know what's going on. Rickets.
Perfect. Well, not perfect, really. I hope you're doing okay. Yeah, the gloomy weather. It's been kind of all around, and a lot of cloudy days so far this kind of early summer. Um, but yeah, so playoffs are in full swing, and Ottawa's not relevant in the playoffs, but they are relevant in some other conversations. We've talked about this a couple times on this podcast, but first question I'm going to ask you is: does Ottawa need to acquire a goalie? So we talked about this a couple weeks ago. Dayton had some really good points in the fact that it's not necessarily a personnel issue in the net; it's a team issue. But do you think that Ottawa should be going out and spending big assets for a goaltender?
Jacob, I think they have to. If they don't have goaltending right out the chute, I think you're looking at an eighth consecutive year of them not being in the playoffs. And if no one can afford that. Staios can't afford it. The team can't afford it. So I've heard that argument that, hey, it's not the goalies, it's the team in front of them. I don't know about that. I mean, we've seen these guys, Corpusalo. I wasn't impressed with him, when I heard he signed him. For me, he was just never a consistent goaltender. And frankly, I don't think he'd ever been a starter. You can argue the point, but I don't think he was a bona fide starter anywhere. So he just wasn't the solution, despite what Pierre Dorion claimed that. He had solved the Senators' goaltending problems last summer. Like not.
Yeah, he did that a couple times. He did that with Matt Murray too, didn't he? And Cam Talbot.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, Brandstrom was what was he, a generational signing or some bloody thing? So I don't know.
yeah,
That's just the way he talked, I guess.
yeah. He had a big mouth, and not in a disrespectful way. He got ahead of himself, and he just let everything come out without thinking about what he was going to do. And I mean, it made for some excellent quotes to break down, but it kind of blew up in his face quite a few times too. So there's a couple names. Before we get into that, it's been 4 full seasons now since Ottawa has had Craig Anderson man the net. Do you know how many goalies that they've used since the last time Craig Anderson was in the crease?
No, and I'm kicking myself here, Jacob, because you answered that question in your latest article. I should have read it. I just, I'd read a few others of your articles, didn't get that one. So you know the answer. What is it?
Yeah, so I wrote a piece about the goaltending carousel that Ottawa has kind of had since the last time Anderson was in the crease. 13 goalies. And now you include Dylan Ferguson in there, who had a phenomenal NHL debut, and then just he was breath in the wind, and he's in the KHL now. You got Kevin Mandolese and Levi Muralainen. They played a couple of games as prospects and whatnot, but 13 goalies. Like that is insane. I don't know if that's the most in the NHL, but it's got to be up there. They had a franchise record of 7 goalies used 2 seasons ago. That's injuries happen, sure, but you also have completely inconsistent depth in the crease, and we saw even in the Cam Talbot season that at the end of the year he was a scratch. And Ottawa ran with Forsberg and Sogard at the end of the season when they were, I mean, not in the running for the playoffs, but they finished the season 6 points out of the playoffs. And even though running down the stretch, they would sit Cam Talbot. Like there hasn't been any success outside of, I would say, Anton Forsberg out of those 13 goalies.
I don't know what makes me want to hit the bottle of scotch in my drawer worse. The fact that, you've had 13 goaltenders, it says you put it a carousel, or when I think of all the great goaltenders, they just let go. I mean, look around the league, the number of goaltenders, good goaltenders that were once with the Ottawa Senators. You could go on and on, right?
Well, yeah, just over the past decade, I mean, they've had Robin Leonard, Ben Bishop. They let those guys go. Even more recently, you got Philip Gustafson. He was
Yeah.
great in Minnesota. It's Ottawa always seems to let go of the wrong guy, and it's not just a Dorion thing. It happened with Brian Murray too, and it's happened in the past as well. It's Ottawa's just always had a hard time finding consistent goaltending outside of Craig Anderson, who's next on the list. Patrick Lalime, who was good for a little bit, but like I don't know.
Yeah, I'm just listening to you talk there. It makes me think. I read an essay, I forget where it was, about there's almost no correlation between college football quarterbacks, like where they go in the draft and how successful they are in the NFL. And I don't know what it is with Ottawa. I mean, do other teams have the same problem? They just don't seem to be able to identify a starting goaltender and keep them. But
Yeah,
that's the only explanation I have for letting all these goaltenders go.
I think it's a combination of poor pro and amateur scouting at times, and I think that all stems back to um, how much that kind of stuff is valued and how much the owner of the team was willing to pay. And in Ottawa, I mean, it's no secret that under the Eugene Melnick, they weren't looking to hand out money to people that they didn't need to. But you could certainly argue that they needed to, looking at how their kind of trajectory was over the past 2 decades.
Yeah. But I guess, if you look back over goaltenders that came out of nowhere to become stars, it's just, how do you explain it? I think this is a problem across the NHL.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I think that like right now we're seeing the Russians and the Americans kind of take over the goaltending conversation. And I don't know what it is. I don't know why like we go through phases, right? So for 5 or 6 years it was just Americans coming out of the draft that were really starting to thrive in the NHL, and now we're in the kind of the Russian territory. And so like we're seeing Ilya Sorokin, Andrei Vasilevsky, Igor Shesterkin, at like just these Russian goaltenders are taking over the league. And yeah, when you look at the Americans, like there's Connor Hellebuck, Jake Ottinger, Jeremy Swayman, like they're all still fairly young. But it's insane that, and it, like you look at the Canadian goaltending depth, who are they going to run with in the Four Nations face off and the Olympics and all that? And it's a bit of a crapshoot.
Makes you pine for the days of Marty Brodeur.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get into some actual rumors that have been surrounding Ottawa. Now, these have come from a number of sources. Elliot Friedman, Bruce Garriock, David Pagnotta has mentioned a couple names. But first, we're going to go to the one that's been talked about the most is Linus Ullmark. So he had a phenomenal season in Boston last season with a nine, I believe it was a 938 and won the Vesna. He took a bit of a step back this year. I think it was a 918 this season, which is still incredible. And Ottawa would love to have something like that. He's got 1 year left on a $5 million contract, and he's got a 15 team no trade clause. So he would likely have to waive it to come to Ottawa, because I can almost guarantee that that's going to be on his list. But what do you think? Should Ottawa be looking at Linus Ullmark?
Oh, I think they have to. I would imagine Staios. He's Allmark's probably at the very top of his goaltending file on his desk. But that said, there's a lot of other teams interested. He's probably, well, arguably, along with Markstrom, the best talent that is available this summer. So he's going to get a lot of attention. I wonder, you could make a hockey trade. It's almost one for one if you traded Chikrin for Allmark, right? They make similar salaries. They've both got 1 year term left. But rumor has it that Don Sweeney, the Boston GM, is he's being aggressive in terms of what he wants. I mean, not only does he want a roster player, but apparently he's looking for a first round pick, or at least a very high pick. And so the question then becomes, is that something Ottawa would consider, given the sorry state of the prospect pool? Is that
Yeah,
too
I
high?
I think it's really interesting because yes, the prospect pool is terrible. You can kind of forgive that. Like you look at the Bruins, you look at the Tampa Bay Lightning, you can forgive that with some success. And is Linus Ullmark going to give you more success than who you expect at 25th overall or who you expect at 37th overall with the second round pick? Probably, but how much are you willing to risk on that? I do think that Ullmark would be a fantastic addition. I do think that he is still a great goalie and could really help save the Senators in the crease. How much are you really willing to give up? Like if the ask is for Jacob Chikrin and 25th overall, are you going to take that?
25th, yeah, I'd consider that,
Yeah.
you know.
So it's really interesting. I think that no matter what, if Ottawa is trading for Linus Ullmark, it needs to come with an extension. They've been bit by that a couple times. They had DeBrincat, that contract situation blew up in their face. Jacob Chikrin played one season. Now he's 1 year away from unrestricted free agency, and it doesn't look like an extension is going to happen. So they need long term stability, and especially in the net, like they've been like I said, it's just been a carousel of goaltenders, and they need some stability there. They need to sign somebody to, like not necessarily 8 years, but 5 or 6 years for somebody that can be a true number one goaltender and an elite one at that.
How old's Allmark? 30?
He is 30.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So, there's some runway for him, possibly 5 years.
Well, you look at
But
goaltenders, their prime is usually like for most players, it's like the 25 to 29 range. For goalies, it's usually like 28 to 35. Like they it takes a while for them to get their feet wet, and with goalies, it's always just they're great until they're not.
if you're Staios this summer, you okay, theoretically, you could look internally. Do you have a prospect? The answer, we all know what the answer to that is. Matt Sogard is not it. He needs more seasoning in the AHL. I think we saw that in the six games he's played. And then if you look at the free agency market, is there any solution out there? The answer is really no. There's just not a lot of talent in free agency. So that leaves a trade, and you got to make the trade this summer. Well, for a couple of reasons, right? I mean, the last two seasons, maybe three, the Senators, their season's been over by November. And the reason it's been over is they've just had crummy goaltending. That can't happen again. And if they don't get a decent goaltender in there, chances are it will. So, and in-season trades, yeah, they just don't work out in this league, right? I mean, they just don't happen. So you got to make the trade now, essentially. So I imagine a goaltender it's right on the top of his problem pile on his desk.
Yeah, I agree. It's something that's really going to happen. And like you said, it's going to happen now. The stability in net just needs to be locked down. You do look at their current goaltending situation, and if Ottawa is going to be trading for Linus Ullmark, you would probably expect that Anton Forsberg is going the other way. They do have Brandon Bussi as their kind of upcoming prospect goalie, who looks pretty good. I don't know if he's quite ready for a backup spot, so Forsberg could take that. He has lower cap hit. He's probably going to be part of that trade, but you can't go into the season with three goalies. And there's no way that Boston's taking Korpisalo back. So uh, I think that Forsberg kind of has to be part of that trade for it to make sense for both sides. But and one thing that you mentioned was the free agency. The only goalie that I'm looking at in free agency that I would have any interest in, which it's impossible to do when you have Jonas Korpisalo, but I wouldn't be opposed to bringing in Laurent Brossoit. He had a fantastic season in Winnipeg. He had a fantastic season in Vegas the year before. He was their starter going into the playoffs when they won the cup. So he could be an option, but again, unless you're moving out Corpus you're not signing him.
So you don't think he could Staios could buy a general manager somewhere a really nice dinner and sweet talking into taking Korpisalo, huh?
I don't think so. I don't think teams are too eager to take that contract on right now.
Yeah, God. Reminds me of Matt Murray, right? I mean, Ottawa was the only team that would take that one on, and they did it again with Korpisalo. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Uh,
well,
the latest name to come up, and Ottawa seems to be heavily linked to them, is Jacob Markstrom. So the
mhm.
Calgary Flames goaltender, he has 2 years left with a $6 million cap hit. He he's the only reason the Calgary Flames were even a little bit competitive at parts of last season. And he has a no trade clause, so he would have to waive to come here. And it sounds like the New Jersey Devils are leading the way in the kind of race for making a trade for Markstrom, but Ottawa has been linked pretty heavily and is certainly in the running for that. One really interesting piece that's coming up is using the seventh overall draft pick to move down to ninth and swap with the Flames, because moving up 2 spots in the top 10 is pretty significant, especially with somebody who we're going to talk about a little bit later, Tij Iginla. He is, I mean, if the Flames want him, I'm sure. And if they have the opportunity to move up a couple spots and hope to get him, I'm sure they're going to do that. They would also probably want 25th overall and Zach Ostapchuk. And if they're going to take Korpisalo back, they're not going into a place where they're looking for success over the next couple seasons. They're in rebuild mode. They're looking for younger guys. Ottawa giving them some futures, and then Ostapchuk just to take on Korpisalo. I think that's a pretty fair deal. But yeah, what do you think of Jacob Markstrom? Do you think he's somebody that Ottawa should be looking at?
Well, I think he'd get you off to the right start. He's 33. He's a aging, very expensive asset, but at least he'd get you off to the right start. He's not long term. I think, though, you hit. Maybe I don't want to rush ahead and start discussing Tij Iginla before you're ready, Jacob. But you raised it. I've heard variations on trading Ottawa's seventh for Calgary's ninth, but the deal I've heard is Markstrom plus the ninth round pick in exchange for the seventh. And you might be able to also dump some salary by moving Forsberg and Hamonic. Um, there's any number of combinations and permutations here, I guess, but the basic structure would be seventh for ninth and include Markstrom in it. Um, yeah, it's possible, I guess. I wouldn't be opposed to it. Like I say, they need some type of goaltending, and Korpisalo and Forsberg aren't it. They just can't continue on with them.
Yeah, I think Markstrom, his season in Calgary in 2023-24 went really underappreciated. I think that he, again, like I just mentioned, he's the only reason that they weren't like a bottom six team. They were close to that, but at points they were like playoffs weren't unrealistic for them like halfway through the season, and that's only because of Jacob Markstrom. And I think that uh teams really understand the impact that he had on them last season. Now he's a bit of a hot and cold goalie. He'll have a good year and a bad year, a good year and a bad year. But of course, when he lands in Ottawa, it's probably going to be 2 bad years in a row. But he's really really good. He is a veteran and he has 2 years left. If Steve Staios believes that it's going to be Levi Miralainen or Mads Søgaard that are going to be ready to take the net in 2 years, then I think that Jacob Markstrom is a fantastic stopgap and could fill that role really well, um, and provide like that again that veteran leadership. Kind of maybe in a year or two have Sogard or Miralainen back him up and learn from him, figure out how to play, figure out the tricks and whatnot to make a successful NHL goaltender. But I do think that Markstrom would be an excellent ad. Again, I think the Devils are leading the race there, but I think that Markstrom would be a great addition to the Senators.
So do you think he could handle north of 60 games in a year? I know when he was younger, he used to like to do that. But then more recently, I think teams have gone to what they call a 1A and a 1B goaltending structure. So you've got basically two equally talented goaltenders that split the workload. Don't know if that would be possible in Ottawa with Korpisalo as the backup.
Yeah, I well with Corpusalo as the backup, I wouldn't mind 30 games out of him.
Yeah.
like a 50-30 split, I don't think that's a huge problem. And if it's Forsberg, I wouldn't mind that either. If Markstrom can stay healthy and can put together 50 really good games, I don't think that that's going to be a problem in Ottawa. I do think that not last year. I think he played 48 games this past season, but the 2 years before that, I think he played 59 and 63. So he's still capable of it. And I think he's better in a smaller sample size, like closer to the 50 games. But it's really interesting to kind of ask that though, because he is getting older. It's kind of going to be his preference. How much do you want to play, and then let his play dictate that. Um, but yeah, I think that Korpisalo, Forsberg, or even Sogard are fine for a backup role, like a
Yeah.
25 to 30 games.
Yeah, I mean, Markstrom's an interesting guy, right? I was just thinking, I don't think he's played anywhere else except Canada, right? Vancouver, Calgary, possibly Ottawa now. Has he played outside of Canada before or
No, I
not?
don't think so. He was,
Hmm.
yeah, no, I don't think so. He he likes Canada. No, he played in Florida for a
Oh,
couple of years. Yeah.
all right. Hmm.
So the last goalie that we kind of have to talk about today is the Holy Grail. If Ottawa can land Juuse Saros, then that's a complete success. He's going to have a big ticket this with an extension this summer. And again, this is a deal that would have to come with an extension if Ottawa is going to make it. But it would probably start with Jacob Chikrin, probably include the 25th overall pick, and probably another asset or two. I think that going after Juuse Saros, and again, we talked about this with Simmer last week. We don't really have a basis on what superstar goalies go for in the NHL. We haven't seen one traded in a long time, so there's no market already set. So Ottawa would be setting that, or whoever acquires Saros is going to be setting that. But what do you think? Should Ottawa try and hit a home run and get Saros?
Well, sure, Staios has to try it, but you hit the nail on the head. It all depends on the term. He'd better come with an extension. If you're giving up those types of assets, and you're right, there hasn't been a major goaltender trade in years, right? And it used to be you weren't trading roster players for them. They were picks, prospects. That was the price. So.
Yeah, and I don't think Nashville's in a spot that they want picks and prospects. I think that they want that as part of it. But I think like looking at what the Senators have to offer, I think they would want one of Chikrin, Pinto, or Greg. I don't think Ottawa wants to give up Pinto. I'm not sure. I mean, they don't want to give up Greg, but I think that he might be more available than Shane Pinto for sure. And then Chikrin again, he's on the block. So those are three players that I think Nashville would be looking at from Ottawa. And like, do you include Matthew Joseph in there? Add some depth to Nashville and try and help balance the salary. There's a lot of options to make a deal with Nashville.
Yeah, yeah, there really are. I'm actually in anticipation of this discussion. I was looking at some other goaltenders. One that jumped out at me was John Gibson of the Anaheim Ducks, and I think the Ducks they're rebuilding, so they don't really have any need of them, and they might be interested in your picks and prospects. I think he's 30 years old, but my gosh, he's expensive, $6.4 million. Any thoughts on Gibson, whether he'd be an option?
I like Gibson. It's been too long since he's played for a good team. Anaheim held on to him for too long to really have a clear understanding of what he brings to the table now. Like 2 3 years ago, I would have been all for it. I just don't know what to expect from him. He's had some bad seasons. He's played on some really bad teams. Is that part of it? I don't know. And so I wouldn't take the risk just because it's probably going to cost a lot and he has a big salary. But I don't know. I wouldn't be against it if Steve Staios made that deal. I just don't think I would target him just because it's magic beans, I think, at this point.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just listening. We threw out the goalies that we've been talking about have been, with the exception of Ullmark, have been outside the Atlantic Division. And that's, I think it just occurred to me, that would be a downside, or well, downside. It'd be an obstacle, I think, to an Ottawa Boston trade for Ullmark because you're sending a good goaltender like that to Ottawa, and it's Sweeney would have to, you know, raise an eyebrow on that one. He'd think twice.
I don't think Sweeney's afraid to make those deals though. Like you look, they acquired Tyler Bertuzzi last year.
That's true.
They've made some in division trades, and I don't think that's something Don Sweeney's afraid of. There are GMs that hate doing it and just refuse to do it, but I don't think Don Sweeney's one of them. But no, you're right. Especially with a goalie, you just never know. Maybe he's like, we don't want to play against this guy. Maybe he's like, we really want to play against this guy because we know how to beat him. We don't like. I don't know. That's a really interesting point though.
Yeah, yeah. Well, time will tell because I think if something's going to happen, it has to happen in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I agree. So the last talking point that we're gonna kind of end off on here is Tij Iginla. We already mentioned him a little bit. He There's been some rumors today and yesterday that if Ottawa keeps the seventh overall pick and if Tij Iginla is still available, he's probably going to be a Senator. Now, there's a couple pretty high end defensemen available around seventh overall. It really sounds like Ottawa likes somebody like Iginla. And so what Iginla's really good at is carrying momentum, carrying offense, and he's really good at driving the net. He's one of the biggest risers in this draft. He wasn't projected to go top 10, top 15, top 20 at the beginning of the season, but he is now. What are your thoughts on Tij Iginla? I know that you aren't a prospect guru. You're not signing up to be on Prospect Corner next week, but yeah, if you've had some time to look into him, what do you think? What do you see?
Just in no particular order. So there's no arguing with his performance this year, right? He's exploded with the Kelowna Rockets. But it's 1 year and he has been impressive. He's gone 47-37 for a total of 87 points in 64 games. Is that the real deal? Is that the real Iginla here? All based on one season. Um, the other thing, Staios, you know, well, you alluded to it. Do you draft do you draft the best available or do you draft for a position? Lord knows Ottawa needs Senator defenseman, but again was a forward. And I think I know the answer because Staios has given it in his previous, I forget, press conference, but he's basically come out and said early rounds, I will take the best available. It won't be driven by the position. Later rounds, the position. So it wouldn't surprise me to see a Ginla there. I know, Calgary, the fans would love to see him, right? Given who his dad was. But, I think he understands the Iginla pedigree. Staios played with his father in Calgary back in the day. So he understands what he's getting. But I think the question maybe, one question has come up is Ottawa feigning interest in Staios just to up the ante with Calgary, or at least get a better deal on Markstrom.
That's a
Um, I,
really good point. I That's a really interesting point that I hadn't thought of because it is pretty interesting that these rumors are coming out right after Ottawa being interested in Markstrom comes out. That's really interesting and good to think about because are they trying to say you're not getting him if we keep our pick? That's yeah.
yeah. Well, if you're a believer in conspiracy theories, I'm not, but it's apparently all the rage now. So hey, we can engage in conspiracy theories with the best of them, Jacob.
Yeah. Um yeah, it's going to be really interesting. I'm not completely sold on Tij Iginla. I think that he's a great player. I would be more comfortable taking him around 13, 14, 15. He's offensively incredible. He doesn't play like his father did at all. He's not very physical. He doesn't have great speed. He isn't great defensively either. But like his shot and his hands and his playmaking abilities, they're all fantastic. And again, he's great at driving the net. He has a lot of great skills. So I do think that he's going to be an offensive beast in the NHL. I just don't know if he's the kind of player Ottawa needs. So drafting by position. I also don't know if he's going to be the best player available at 7. So that could come back to bite me. 100%.
Well,
I'll take the ownership on that. But
all right. Well, this is recorded, so we're coming back on you. So, well, the other thing too with Iginla, and look, he's 17. He's 17 years old. I don't know that you don't know what you have on your hands with a 17-year-old. It's all a crapshoot. And by the time, I've heard his name bandied about as well, he'd be great. He's a winger. He'd complement to Chuck on the wing, to Chuck on the first line, him on the second. I mean, come on, guys. By the time he makes the team,
yeah,
I think Ottawa's window will have closed, right?
yeah,
Because he's so young. So,
yeah.
but that's the nature of the hype associated with draft picks, right? It's fun to engage in fantasy hockey, but you just don't know what you got with these kids.
It's all magic beans.
Yep.
So yeah, that's gonna wrap things up for today. I really appreciate everybody for checking this out, and if you enjoyed it, let us know, and we'll see you next week.